Why does a memory return, not once but endlessly, like a silent echo through the corridors of your chest? You tell yourself it's over, that they're gone, that it's time to move on. Yet the memory keeps breathing under your skin. Not because of who they were, but because of who you became in their presence. You don't miss them. You miss the way your soul stirred when their eyes found you. Carl Jung once taught that the self, the totality of who you are, calls you back through symbols, dreams, and sometimes obsessions. And what if this memory is not nostalgia, but a sacred signal? A doorway to retrieve a forgotten part of you. This isn't about getting back together. This is about getting back within. Neville Goddard would say, memory isn't passive. It's a seed of consciousness echoing in time until it's embodied again. And maybe this ache in your heart isn't about what was lost, but about what was left unlived. This isn't a haunting, it's a homecoming. There was a time when their gaze awakened something radiant in you. You didn't just feel seen, you felt real, as if a forgotten version of yourself stepped out from the shadows and began to breathe again. And so you adapted, you sparkled, you softened, not out of pretense, but because their presence gave you permission to unfold. Like a flower that only blooms under a specific light, you came alive in their world. But now, the silence stings. Not because they're gone, but because the version of you that existed in their presence no longer knows where to go. This is the true ache behind the memory. You're not longing for them, you're mourning the part of yourself that left when they did. That vivid, soulful version who laughed without armor, who felt without fear. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear in the world. But sometimes, in rare moments, the mask falls. And what remains is not a role, but essence. That's what you felt in their presence. Not just love, but essence. And now, the memory returns not as a chain, but as a compass. Not to draw you back to them, but to draw you back to the self you glimpsed and lost. Neville Goddard reminds us that the outer world reflects our inner state. But when trauma touches the mirror, we often believe the reflection was the source. It wasn't. That light wasn't theirs. It was yours, flickering in the reflection of their eyes. You don't want the relationship back. What you want is your own soul, unguarded, unhidden, unbroken. There is a quiet violence in the phrase, just let go, as if the soul were a faucet that could be shut off, as if memory obeyed the mind's will. But memory is not a prison, it is a portal, and not every door is meant to be closed. Carl Jung understood that the psyche is not linear, it circles back, it returns to the wound not because it is stuck, but because something sacred was left behind. A truth, a voice, a fragment of soul. To forget prematurely is to abandon a part of yourself still waiting to be retrieved. There are memories that are not chains, but keys. They ache not because they bind you, but because they point to a place within that has gone silent. You are not weak for remembering. You are being called. Mainstream spirituality often speaks of cutting cords, as if every connection were a mistake to be undone. But some cords are sacred threads. They are not meant to be cut, but followed. Like Ariadne's thread leading you out of the labyrinth or back into the heart of it. What if this memory is not asking to be released, but revealed? What if it is not holding you back, but leading you home? Neville Goddard saw memory as the residue of a lived state of consciousness, a trace of something your soul once knew deeply. And so, the memory persists, not to haunt you, but to show you the exact point where your soul once felt alive. This is not emotional dysfunction, it is sacred navigation. Sometimes the bond felt too profound to explain, too intense for its brevity, too luminous for its ending. And yet, what if it wasn't love in the way the world defines it? What if it was something older, deeper, more sacred? Perhaps it wasn't about the person. It was about what they mirrored in you, the silent, almost forgotten current of your soul. There are people who don't come to stay. They come to reflect. For a brief moment, they hold up a mirror, and in their eyes you glimpse something you didn't know you'd lost. A frequency, a rhythm, a forgotten state of being. Neville Goddard once said, "We attract not just what we are, but what we remember." And in trauma, we don't always remember who we are. We remember what we are missing. So the soul sends mirrors, not for attachment, but for awakening. Carl Jung would call this an encounter with the anima or animus, the inner soul image we unconsciously seek in others, not to possess them, but to reclaim the part of ourselves they represent. Maybe they weren't your destiny. Maybe they were the lighthouse. Maybe what you felt wasn't theirs. It was your own soul speaking, louder than usual, because it finally had a face to echo through. The question isn't, how do I get them back? The question is, can I now become the version of myself I saw reflected in them? They weren't the path. They were the mirror at the fork in the road. Some memories don't knock. They break the silence. They arrive uninvited, in the stillness of a morning, in the middle of a sentence, or in the echo of a dream. And no matter how many times you try to bury them, they return. But they don't return to torment you. They return to complete something. Carl Jung taught that the psyche speaks in symbols, not in logic. When a memory repeats itself, it isn't the past reappearing. It's a message encoded in emotion, asking to be read. There's a part of you that wasn't heard, a desire that wasn't named, a truth that wasn't lived. And so the soul speaks, not with words, but with repetition. The same image, the same scene, the same feeling, looping through your chest like a whisper trying to find its voice. Neville Goddard believed that every persistent inner experience is a reflection of a state we once embodied and must now integrate, fully, consciously. Until then, it remains in limbo, half known, half felt. This is not a haunting, it's a message. The face that keeps returning in memory may not be asking to be held again, but to be understood. Not for who they were, but for what they awakened in you. The obsession is not about them. It's about the part of you that still feels unfinished. Integration doesn't mean forgetting. It means retrieving the exiled voice and letting it sing again, in your own language, in your own rhythm. The memory repeats because something sacred was left behind, and the soul never forgets where it buried its treasures. There was a moment, maybe brief, maybe quiet, a moment when everything inside you felt weightless, when time dissolved and presence enveloped you like soft light through the trees. You remember that moment, not because of who was beside you, but because of who you were in it. And now, no matter how many places you visit or people you meet, you can't seem to recreate it. The feeling is missing. The aliveness is gone. But what if that feeling wasn't theirs to give? What if it was your own soul opening, unfolding in the safety of being witnessed? Carl Jung understood that moments of true self-expression often occur through relationship, but their origin is within. We attribute our awakening to the one who stood before us, but they were only the catalyst. The spark was already in you. Neville Goddard would say, it was a state of consciousness, one you entered briefly and now long to inhabit again. The tragedy lies in believing that the person was the source of the field. But what if they were only the mirror, the stage, the silent accomplice? And the feeling, the freedom, the light, that was you. You don't need them to return. You need the inner condition that once allowed your truth to rise without shame, without resistance. The memory of that feeling is sacred, not because of the past, but because of the future it points to. The version of you that already exists, waiting to be lived again. This is not about reconstructing a relationship. It's about rebuilding the invisible sanctuary where your soul once danced, unafraid. Some stories don't end, they dissolve, not with closure but with silence. And it is in that silence that the soul begins to ache, because it wasn't just a relationship that ended, it was a myth that remained half-told. Carl Jung taught that deep connections awaken archetypes, primordial symbols living within the collective unconscious. When you loved them, you weren't just a person loving another. You were the muse, the healer, the seeker, the child of wonder. A myth had begun, and then, mid-chapter, the pages stopped turning, and so the memory returns, not to bind you, but to finish what was started, not outside, but within. You may feel stuck, not because you can't forget them, but because the inner story was never completed. The archetype was evoked, but never fulfilled. Neville Goddard reminds us that the state we once lived still lives in us. But unless we embody it consciously, it remains suspended, like a dream we keep waking from too soon. What you're seeking now is not another version of them, but the continuation of the myth they helped you begin. The memory is painful because it holds the energy of what was about to emerge, but never did. The soul doesn't want repetition, it wants redemption. The unfinished must become sacred. The archetype must find a new form, a new stage, a new breath. This isn't about reliving the past. It's about writing the rest of the story with the same soul you first discovered when they entered your life. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. She couldn't explain why that one memory kept returning. It wasn't grand. It wasn't romantic. Just a walk. A late afternoon, the river beside them silent, his presence beside her quiet. And yet, that moment kept echoing inside her, not because of what was said, but because of what she felt, herself. Not the version that performs or pleases, but the version that simply is, present, unmasked, whole. She had stopped painting years before. Life had taken her elsewhere. But in remembering that walk, something opened. A breath she hadn't taken in years, not because he loved her art, but because, in that moment, she remembered that she had once loved it, and so she painted again, not out of nostalgia, out of truth. Carl Jung believed that memory and imagination live side by side in the psyche, that what was once lived can become a map to what still wants to be born. The memory didn't lead her back to him. It led her forward into the self she had glimpsed but never fully inhabited. Neville Goddard would say that she had re-entered a state, that through feeling she had reactivated a dimension of her own consciousness, the river, the silence, the feeling of belonging to herself. That was the seed. The memory was never about him. It was the soul's whisper. Remember this version of you. She's still waiting. There is a longing that no place, no person, no memory can satisfy. A yearning that feels older than time, yet intimately yours. You think you want to return to a moment, a version of life, a feeling. But what you truly desire is not behind you. It's the soul space that memory once opened, and that space is not geographical. It's archetypal, emotional, sacred. Carl Jung taught that individuation is the path toward becoming whole, and sometimes we taste that wholeness fleetingly, through love, through beauty, through heartbreak, not to stay there, but to awaken the memory of what home truly feels like. Not safety, but truth. Not comfort, but recognition. Neville Goddard would call it the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not a fantasy, but a state of being so real that it recreates the world from within. That memory you hold, it carries that frequency. It's not a dream to chase, but a signal to embody. You can't return to that version of life, but you can return to the soul that lived it. The inner home isn't made of past events, it's made of present embodiment. When you carry your truth in your breath, your silence, your gaze, then the memory has served its purpose. It was never about going back. It was about waking up. There are memories that do not age. They remain intact, not because of time, but because of truth. Because in that memory, you weren't playing a role. You were being. And now, the ache doesn't come from absence. It comes from recognition. You remember who you were when their presence illuminated you. And that version of you still waits, behind the noise, beneath the layers. Carl Jung saw memory as more than recollection. He saw it as a compass pointing towards psychic wholeness. What returns to us is not random. It's a symbol, a summons, an invitation to retrieve what remains unlived. Neville Goddard whispered that we return through feeling, not thought. That memory is not a chain, but a channel, and through it we find the pulse of our becoming. This is not obsession. This is remembrance. You don't need to go back in time. You need to reclaim the soul that once stood in the light of that connection. The memory was never about them. It was a signal from yourself, the part of you that once came alive, asking to live again. This is not about going back. It's about finally arriving where your soul always knew it belonged. If you made it this far, comment, "Estoy despierta." You're not alone. This is a path walked by those who feel deeply, remember silently, and heal spiritually. And in this remembering we awaken together.